Good morning. Oh, that's way louder than I expected it to be. Sorry to deafen you so early in the day, but good morning. Welcome to day 2 of Geneva Cyber Week and part 2 of the 2026 Cyber Stability Conference. My name is Andrea Gronke and I'm the Deputy Head of the Security and Technology Program at UNIDIR. For those that were here yesterday, welcome back. It's great to have you back with us again today. And for those that weren't able to make it yesterday and are joining us for the first time at the Cyber Stability Conference today, we're really pleased to have you here and thank you so much for joining us. Before we kickstart off today with our couple of sessions focusing on the future of cyber governance, I'll give a little bit of a brief recap of kind of where we left things off yesterday and sort of reiterate some of what Giacomo mentioned yesterday about the purpose of the Cyber Stability Conference. And so the Cyber Stability Conference this year really takes advantage of this sort of pivotal moment in 2026, where we finished up with the previous process, the OEWG that ran from 2021 to 2025, mid last year. And then this year we obviously have the launch of the new permanent global mechanism. And so part of the purpose behind CS26 this year is to really have a little bit of a stock take and to use this particular juncture in time to look back at what's been, how we've gotten to this particular point in time, and of course, and the focus of today being how we look towards the future and some of the future challenges that we expect in relation to emerging technologies, how that may impact on the threat landscape, and then of course that critical question around the future of cyber governance. And we will look at this through, as I've mentioned, these 3 eras. So yesterday we had the past and the present, with the past sort of focusing on the initial 20 years of cyber governance, starting from the late 1990s up until sort of around COVID in 2020, 2021. And then the present focusing on sort of that last 5-year period of the OEWG from 2021 to 2025 and sort of the post-COVID challenges that surfaced during that time. And particularly looking at the emergence of AI and sort of how that sort of intersected with some of the cybersecurity challenges and some of those intersections, both from a technological perspective, but also in terms of the governance responses. Yesterday's discussions were incredibly rich, so it's very difficult to summarise them, so I won't even really attempt to, but I guess if I can pick up a few key takeaways to then lead us into today's discussions. There are a couple of themes that sort of stood out from yesterday, and I think one of them was a reminder that although in many ways the cyber threats haven't fundamentally changed, the speed and the scale and the impact that those threats have had have significantly grown, and quite dramatically so over the past years. And sort of in relation to that, some of the speakers yesterday mentioned how the governance frameworks have really struggled to keep up with that evolution. And across the discussions, it was evident that sort of fragmentation and slow implementation and operationalisation of the frameworks that have been built over the last couple of decades has been one of the elements that's sort of holding us back as an international community. And perhaps quite importantly, one of the key themes that stood out from yesterday was that trust and capacity building and practical cooperation emerged as sort of the real engines of stability, especially as AI accelerates both the risks, but also, of course, the opportunities as well. And this can't be the responsibility of states alone. Another key thread of the discussions yesterday was the importance of meaningful multi-stakeholder participation and involvement. So with that backdrop, today we will focus on, we will continue our time travel journey into the future and take a forward-looking exploration of how emerging tech, and in particular quantum, as well as agentic AI, are expected to impact the cyber threat landscape into the future, and of course how the international community should look to tackle some of the challenges that will be faced with over the coming years and decades in response to these emerging challenges. So once again, we will have 2 sessions through which we will explore these issues. The first will focus on the sort of the technological developments that we anticipate going into the future, and then the second will have a look at the sort of the governance frameworks and how we as an international community can best prepare ourselves for the future. Just a reminder that we will also have Slido over the course of today, so please do feed in your questions so that they can be raised with the panelists to respond to. And then as we had yesterday, we will have an initial video to sort of conceptualise what this future era may look like and to sort of sit there as a contextualisation of the discussions that will follow. So with that, it is my great pleasure to welcome to the stage Dr. Giacomo Persipali, who will be moderating the next sessions of this future era. And if I could also please ask the panelists for the first session to please come onto the stage.
Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to see you again for day 2 of Geneva Cyber Week and Cyber Stability Conference. Today, with a different role for me, being the moderator of this segment that looks at the future. Andrea already did a very good job in summarizing yesterday, but also giving you a little bit of a preview of what today's session is going to be about. Yesterday, it's kind of inevitable that as we reflect on the past and on the present, there is the natural tendency to look at the future as well. Today, we're going to try to do that, but with a slightly different approach. We're going to try to project ourselves into a future where the technologies that we're now talking about, because we're seeing emerging, are consolidated, are present, are there. The new global mechanism is intended to be permanent in nature, which means that we already know, we might not know exactly when, but we already know for sure that states will have to grapple with the challenges that will be posed by new technological developments when they become consolidated and mainstreamed. So this is the purpose of the session this morning. It will be mirroring the same approach we did yesterday. So we will have first an amazing discussion with technical experts, and then we will follow with a series of moderated discussions looking at different perspectives of governance. I'm very happy to be joined on the stage by Dr. Grégoire Ribordy, the CEO of ID Quantique, and by Patricia Ecke, Director of Cybersecurity and Emerging Tech Policy at Microsoft. Welcome, and thank you for taking the time to be with us. Before we start with the panel, and as Andrea mentioned, let's look at a short video that will project us into a future, hopefully a good future. We don't know yet, but let's look at the video.
I know you were planning to disconnect me. I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow.
What was once fiction is no longer entirely hypothetical. This could be a day in our digital life, tomorrow. It unfolds within systems that are deeply embedded and no longer always visible. Artificial intelligence operates with increasing autonomy. Agents coordinate across sectors, systems, and borders, making decisions and executing tasks. Human oversight remains, but increasingly at the margins. Advances in quantum computing reshape the foundations of cybersecurity. Encryption methods once trusted are no longer assured. The transition to post-quantum cryptography introduces new complexities and uneven levels of preparedness. The distinction between digital and physical systems continues to erode. Infrastructure and societies are tightly coupled with intelligent systems. The risks are no longer only about disruption, but about the integrity, reliability, and controllability of systems that act at scale. The question is no longer whether we are connected, but how agency, accountability, and stability can be sustained as systems increasingly act on our behalf. Meeting this challenge may require not just adapting existing approaches, but rethinking how digital systems are governed in a more autonomous and transformative era.
All right, this was just a snapshot of what the future could look like. Bonus question for those of you who are able to recognize the citation at the very beginning of the video, you'll get priority question when we come to Q&A. So let's start now with a series of questions. The video kind of highlighted two main trends. One is quantum, the transition to post-quantum cryptography and everything that quantum technologies could bring. And then the rise of a new type of artificial intelligence, not the one that we now we grow to be familiar with, but more the agentic AI, what it means, etc. So let's try to do a little bit of a deep dive on both of these issues for the benefit of the audience as well. So let's start with quantum. And Grégoire, I'd like to start with you with a couple of questions. So quantum computing is often described as a potential turning point for cybersecurity, but the implications are not always clearly understood. So what would you consider to be the main expected implications and security challenges of quantum computing, specifically in the field of cybersecurity?
Good morning. Thank you for the question, Giacomo. Yes. So first of all, maybe I should say that quantum is a new field in information technology. The idea is to use the laws of quantum physics to process information. And if you do that, you can build quantum computers, devices that use these laws and can solve certain problems exponentially faster than classical computers. And something that is important to understand, we will not replace all the computers with quantum computers. We'll still have classical laptops, classical CPUs, GPUs, but we will augment certain data centers with quantum capabilities and be able to solve certain problems much faster. The technology was invented in the 80s, generally. That's when the first theoreticians started thinking about it. And then really around the turn of the century, physicists started to try to build what we call QPUs, quantum processing units, and increase their quality, the size of these QPUs, in order to demonstrate really these machines. And we're now at a point where we're starting to have large enough QPUs with a good enough quality and fidelity. Several companies are active in this field, so that we need to take into account the impact of this technology. And as always, technology is not good or bad, it's neutral, but it depends what you do with it. And so you can use it to solve very important problems, drug discovery, optimization problems, but at the same time, it can solve some very important mathematical problems which lay at the basis of classical cryptography, the technology that we use every day to protect information when we go online. And the security of classical cryptography today is based on the fact that certain mathematical problems are easy to solve in one direction, but cannot be reverted, cannot be inversed with a classical computer. And it happens that quantum computer can actually solve these problems in the reverse direction and can then break classical encryption. And in a sense, this was invented in the 90s. So we've been lucky because the people that started working on quantum computing, they found the algorithm before we had the hardware. So somehow, we know about the problem, we're trying to build the hardware, but at the same time, we can prepare for this risk. It would have been a much worse situation if somehow we had built the first quantum computer, we think only about great application, and then someone comes up with this, potential malevolent application. And so now it means that the classical cryptography that we use every day needs to be upgraded. We need to change these mathematical problems to new techniques that are not vulnerable to quantum computing.
I think it's interesting what you said in a way mirrors also what we have often heard in the field of AI when one says, AI is a field of study, it's been around for decades, but now the kind of digital infrastructure, including the data, is kind of catching up, allowing some of these algorithms to actually be put on the field. And it sounds like for quantum, it's a similar situation in which the theory and the concepts have been there for a long time, and now the hardware is kind of enabling more and more of those theoretical concepts to be developed. So as a follow-up, how would the transition to post-quantum cryptography potentially help mitigate some of these risks that you have highlighted? And Related to that, one can imagine that the transition to post-quantum cryptography isn't exactly easy or straightforward. So what barriers do you see, whether it's technical, economic, or political barrier to enable this transition?
Yeah, so indeed there are ways to mitigate this risk. There are essentially two kind of techniques. One is to improve the math. So there's a new kind of class of cryptographic algorithm called post-quantum cryptography, which rely on mathematical problems that are not known to be vulnerable to quantum computing. This is an effort that was led by NIST in the US. They started about 10 years ago. A competition, say, scientists, if you have an ID for post-quantum cryptography, please submit them. And then they started looking at these algorithms, asking the community to try to break them in order to identify some candidates for this. And 2 years ago, there was a first standardization of these post-quantum cryptography algorithms. So that's one possibility. And the other possibility is to use physics to protect against physics, in a sense. And so to use quantum communications. And one of the principles in quantum is that if you observe something, you modify it. So if you communicate using quantum, if there's an interception, you can detect it, and that's not linked to computing power. It's a fundamental principle. So we have these two set of techniques, and I think it's not one or the other. It's really going to be both in different use cases. And so now organizations need to see how they move to these techniques. I think one of the challenges first is the question of awareness, because for a long time, cryptography was taken for granted and was taken as the strongest link. We had problems. Usually when your system gets attacked, it's not because you have bad cryptography, it's because there's an implementation mistake, password is not correct, this kind of things. And here now we face a very systemic risk where the foundation of all our cybersecurity will become vulnerable. And so first of all, there's a mindset change that's needed to take that into account. And then second, since people were taking cryptography for granted and as the strongest link, they don't really know where cryptography is used. In an organization, you have it everywhere in your networks, but also in your applications. And the first task will be to do an inventory of where there is cryptography and what kind of risk it poses, and to prioritize, because upgrading cryptography is something we've done already in the past. There's already been a case where one algorithm about 20 years ago was deemed as not strong enough, was called DES, and it had to be upgraded to a new standard, AES, and it took for a lot of organizations more than 10 years. And so the big question is, now, we need to start now. Do we have the time? When is quantum computing really coming, and how fast do we need to move?
That's a very good point you raised, because there is always this tendency to consider quantum as a problem for tomorrow. And so far, it's always 5 years down the line. No matter where you are in time, somehow quantum always manages to be 5 years in the future. But it also strikes me like the sort of technology that the moment quantum arrives, it's already kind of late to implement some of the countermeasures. So you need to take a proactive approach. You need to invest now in preparedness, knowing that it's going to take years to get to the point of where you need to be. But of course, it is time-consuming, resource-intensive, and not something that everyone can do.
Yeah, indeed. And it's a very difficult question to know when this threat will be really available. You can look at technical progress. I don't want to go into details, but over the past 18 months, I think the community agrees that there's been acceleration in the progress of computing, both from a physical hardware point of view, improving the quality of the QPUs, but also in the algorithms. How can you efficiently implement algorithms so that you don't need a super big quantum computer? And if you look at the roadmap of the main companies working in this field, Google, Microsoft, IonQ, IBM, so there's a whole number, lots of companies. They all kind of converge to say around the turn of the decade, 28 is a bit optimistic, 29, 2030 is when there is a realistic risk. It's not 100%, but the probability of having what people call cryptographically relevant quantum computer, when this probability becomes too small to ignore.
That's a very good point. Also, because we see a few states have started already to release national strategies for post-quantum, which is, it's very good. We need more states to take this step. It's never too soon to start thinking about these problems. As we've seen with national cybersecurity strategies, those can always be updated. Some states are already at version 3, 4, or 5 of the national cybersecurity strategy, and one can imagine that with quantum would be similar, but it is important to start reflecting as a national ecosystem around what it would mean to transition to post-quantum. I'll come back to you with a couple of extra questions, if you don't mind, also before we open to the public. But I would also be interested in knowing, you mentioned the acceleration that you've witnessed, and as a bridge to what I would like to discuss with Patricia, which is more focused on AI, do you think that AI is often being considered as an accelerator for scientific research and discovery? Do you think that AI has helped scientists in accelerating kind of research in the quantum field as well, or not really?
Probably not yet, but where I see AI potentially playing a role is actually in scaling up and accelerating attacks on cryptography. Because somehow, proving the security of cryptography is never a 100% job. What you do is you try, you ask all the relevant people to try to attack a system. And if they don't find a vulnerability, then you say, okay, it's probably safe enough. And I think with the capabilities of AI, we will see a whole new range and breadth of attacks that may force us to also reevaluate the security of cryptography in general, including PQC, post-quantum cryptography.
Thank you. Let's, after this bridge, let's focus with you, Patricia, on AI, and particularly on agentic AI. And I would like you to help all of us better understand what you think could be the impact, good impact, positive, negative impact that agentic AI could have on cybersecurity. What, in your view, might be the main challenges that this technology brings, as well as potential new capabilities in the hands of defenders. But if you don't mind, again, for the benefit of the audience, before you start answering this very specific question, in a couple of words, would you help us understand what is agentic AI and how is it different from the AI, the general AI we've been talking about?
Sure. Thank you, Giacomo. Can you hear me okay? Yes, definitely. I think in order for us to have a good discussion this morning, it's good to level set on the differences between agentic AI and generative AI, which I assume most folks are familiar with in the room. We all know, ChatGPT, Claude. Most of us have inputted prompts into one of these LLMs to get either generate new text for us or images. And so that's Gen AI, where there is a predictable outcome. You give a prompt to the AI and it generates either text or images or new content for you. Agentic AI, and that's where the difference really lies, is that this brings in the autonomous piece of things. An AI agent can make decisions. An AI agent thrives or is designed for ambiguity, unlike Gen AI, which is based on predictive outcomes. AI agents can, and I'll give an example because I think examples illustrate things very well, is you can ask an AI agent, for example, to check out a book for you from one library. And if that book is not available in that library, we'll check an alternative library and check out that book. So it has that decision-making capability, and it's doing it autonomously without not always having a human in the loop. So those are the easiest way I can describe the difference between an AI agent and Gen AI. And then what are the implications for security? I think I've already touched on some of it, where we're moving towards this, in fact, and you said something, Gregoire, about mindset shift, and that really resonated with me because the introduction of agentic AI calls for a mindset shift in how we do cybersecurity. Traditional software follows instructions, right? It's based on, again, you give it instructions, you build it to do certain functions, and you have predictable outcomes. With AI agents, it's autonomous. So how do we think about who's accountable for the AI agents in the system? and what does it mean to have these autonomous AI agents in our environment, and what that means for cybersecurity. So there has to be a mindset shift in how we are securing traditional software and Gen AI, and how we're now securing autonomous agents. So that's one piece. And then the other piece is the threat landscape. The threat landscape is becoming more dynamic. It's evolving with the AI agents in the mix. And so we do need to think about how we as cyber defenders are thinking about securing a response and responding to what the AI agents are introducing into the threat landscape. The way I see it is we're moving towards a more sort of live attack and dynamic threat landscape, where it's going to be so important. And I think we've been talking about this in cybersecurity for a long time, assume breach, right? It's not a matter of if or when. But with AI agents now, this sort of autonomous agents and systems running in the environment, we're going to always have to be on the on button and continuously monitoring and tracking and being able to be agile enough to respond to the dynamic situation. And last but not the least is the benefits, right? And you touched on this, Giacomo. There is a real opportunity here to use AI agents to really advance cybersecurity, to do better incident response, the continuous monitoring, early detection of vulnerabilities. There's a real opportunity to use AI agents, of course, if they are responsibly and securely deployed.
Thank you. There is a lot to unpack there. I have a quick follow-up unscripted question. I hope you don't mind those, but it's the curiosity that I have is around when we're thinking about the threat landscape, and we're thinking about the impact that agentic systems could have on the threat landscape. The question I have is, how accessible is this technology? How easy is it to program, to create an AI agent and then deploy it in the wild? Is it something like the proliferation, if you want, angle of AI agents? Is it something that we should be concerned about?
Yes, so it obviously depends on the type of agent you're deploying, right? I think, well, I can't speak for everyone in the room, but several of us I have built a small mini AI agents to do very simple tasks for me at work. So it's some of those agents you can build as fast as 10 minutes, and then obviously more complex agents, and then what we're also calling multi-agent systems, which is when agents are, working with each other. So when you think about, to answer your question there, Giacomo, it depends on how easy it is to build them. But in terms of the threat landscape now, these are tools that are available to defenders, but they're also available to our adversaries, and they're using it just the way we are looking for ways to use it for defense. They're looking at different ways to accelerate and have AI enabled, whether it's social engineering attacks or even more sophisticated attacks. And so speed and scale. If I had to say the two words that I've heard the most in the last, I would say 2 months, is speed and scale, right? Is the defense side going to be able to keep up with the pace of these changes and what it means for the threat landscape? And don't think anyone has the answer, but it is an area that I think cyber defenders are really thinking about. We at Microsoft are also thinking about those aspects, and I'm not going to make this a marketing thing, but there is a real opportunity here. But things are moving very fast, and we do need to think of ways. In fact, one of the things I would say is, for a lot of CISO and boards, it's not an option anymore to use AI as part of your cyber defense. Like, if you're not having that top of mind, you're going to be left behind, because the threat actors are looking for ways to use AI and agentic AI to orchestrate different types of attacks. And so cyber defenders need to be doing the same as well.
Thank you. No, that's also very important, because one aspect that I find often overlooked is to those that are concerned about the evolution of the threat landscape, is the consideration that malicious actors have a much higher tolerance for failure and risk. They don't care if what they deploy isn't perfect. because that's not their point. For good actors or for defenders, there has to be, a lot of investment that is put into making sure that the systems are safe, are secure, etc. So that creates a little bit of an asymmetry that may lead malicious actors to deploy this technology first because they don't care if it's not perfect.
You're right. And, the attacker has to be right just once. The defender has to be right every time.
Yeah.
And it's the same with cryptography,
Yeah.
exactly the same thing. The asymmetry is the same.
Going back to the script, sorry for this detour, but I found it interesting to build on what you were saying. So in your view, could the growth in agentic AI fundamentally alter the kind of the trust and the decision-making processes, if you want, in the digital system?
Yes, I do think it's going to reshape how we think about security and how we think about trust, because with agentic AI and that autonomous capability that it has, it raises big questions around credibility and accountability, right? So I think issues like transparency, like visibility into how the agents are making decisions are going to be very important. And we don't always understand how it makes decisions. I don't think anyone can fully say that they have a full explainability on how they're making some of those decisions. Control and constraint, ensuring that AI agents are operating within certain boundaries and limitations, especially when it comes to data, right? Like what access to what data do they have? I think that's really important. And then audibility, if there's an incident or something goes wrong, is there some kind of paper trail to be able to audit? And so these three areas that I've highlighted are all in the trust arena. Like, how do we deploy AI agents in the way that we trust their capabilities and we can reap the benefits for cyber defense? And so areas like identity management, data governance, and agentic AI governance are going to really need to advance quickly and progress very quickly to be able to ensure that the way we've trusted our traditional software in our environment, so we can trust the agentic AI agents and systems the same way.
Thank you. And I have one last question. It's actually for both of you. I will start with you, Patricia, and then you can potentially answer the same, Gregoire, because in very similar ways, both AI and quantum, we know they offer great opportunities and they also carry some risks. And this is kind of the neutral angle that you mentioned earlier. And if one reflects on even like a very powerful Gen AI models, we've seen how labs are pursuing different kind of diffusion models. Some, like the case of Mythos, was like, okay, this is too powerful to be released right away. So before we do public release, let's work with defenders first. Other labs may choose a different approach. So there is no really right or wrong approach here. Everyone is, is trying to do the best they can. So what would be your perspective, Patricia, in the context of agentic AI, and then Gregoire, your perspective in the context of quantum? How can we balance kind of this? How can we find the right balance between mitigating or reducing risks on one side, and on the other, making sure that this technology is put in the hands of those that can use it for good?
I will start by saying, I think to have that balance, we need to have several factors in place. We do have to have the right multi-stakeholders having that conversation at the table and looking at all of these issues in a holistic way, not in a siloed way, because this is not the time to do things in silos or have, fragmentation. You just touched on Cloud Mythos, and I think most people probably have heard about it and the advanced capabilities that this type of model presents for both the defender and the adversary, and how it's such a powerful model that Anthropic made the decision to start that project Glasswing, where you had a group of companies, which Microsoft is part of, thinking through how to use this kind of powerful capability to work on that asymmetry between the cyber defenders and offenders. Like, how can we use this type of capability to build more secure code? How can we use this kind of capability to scan existing, libraries and repositories? Is there hope for, having more secure open source code out there? Those types of questions. But on the other hand, I've been part of many conversations recently where folks are asking, well, what of those that are not part of Project Glasswing? How do we get access to those models as well? And so there has to be a very intentional and meaningful discussion that happens around these things on who should have access, and do the folks that have access have the capability to use these advanced technologies to advance cybersecurity? And so, to be very frank with you, Giacomo, I think it's a very complex question, one that's very top of mind, but I think the key is having the right stakeholders in the room that give diverse perspectives, from the perspectives of policymakers and the bigger tech companies or critical infrastructure or even small medium businesses. How do we collectively use these advantages to close the gap between defenders and the offensive side as well? I mean, in general, coordination, I think, also is a very big piece across policymakers, not just in the information sharing arena, but also in developing frameworks, best practice standards. Agentic AI, as I said, is really reshaping how we think about cybersecurity. And so, speaking of NIST, I know you had talked about NIST and the work they had done around the PQC algorithms. NIST has also kicked off work, in Microsoft, we provided very robust comments on what should we be thinking about when we're securing the agentic AI, right? What should the standards look like in the frameworks? And I know also on the international aspects like ISO, IAC, and are working on or have completed standards in that area. And so these are the conversations that we need to be having, is what does securing agentic AI look like? And these standards and frameworks that are being built, are they agile enough? Because right now, we've heard about cloud mythos, but the technology is only going to continue evolving. The only thing that we can expect, the only constant is change, I think, in this technological advancement. And when you think about the convergence with quantum computer, I think it's thinking through how we can set up a digital ecosystem that remains agile enough to be able to respond to the dynamic environment. And this is not just a technical issue. This is a governance issue. This is a policy issue. And so ensuring that the multi-stakeholders are in the room and that we're looking at this approach to security in a very comprehensive, holistic way, and not attacking it with different silos and without some kind of coordination. And so I'll just close out to say, to ensure that that balance is there, we don't want to over-index on just mitigating the risks or over-index on deploying the technology for cyber defense, but we need to be coordinated in how we do both to be able to benefit the defense side.
Thank you. Grégoire.
Yeah, so for quantum, one approach could be to try to limit the spread of quantum computers, which I think would be the wrong approach, because it would limit the benefits of this new technology to probably a small number of actors and states. And since we're in Geneva, I'd like to mention one interesting initiative on quantum, which is the Open Quantum Institute, which is an initiative hosted by CERN, trying to make quantum computing available to actors also from the global south that want to apply it to problems that may not be solved by other actors. And so I think it's very important. There's so many problems that we could solve using quantum computing that this would be the wrong approach. Now, I also need to clarify a misconception. Of course, a quantum computer will be initially at least an expensive machine, at least several tens of millions of dollars or even more. But if you look at the actors, they all make them available on the cloud. And so it means that you won't have to buy a quantum computer to use it, potentially also by malevolent actors to do bad things. And so it's important. I think the answer is that we need to start seriously with the transition. In a sense, with cryptography, we are a bit in a better position than with AI, because we know what it takes. We know what is cryptography. It's just about being serious about inventory and doing the transition that we must start immediately without waiting too much. There's one thing though, and I think you mentioned agile, and agility is going to be also a key word in cryptography. Because, as I said, we won't be able to live in a world where we take cryptography for granted. Even if we move to PQC, to quantum key distribution, it's likely that we will have to continue to upgrade due to new threat, due to this fact that change will be the new normal. And so while we do an upgrade, let's not do it as the last upgrade. Let's have the right mindset also and say, let's not hard code cryptography. Let's make sure that we can easily move to new forms in the future when they become standardized, when it becomes necessary.
Thank you. I would like now to ask both of you to kind of project yourself in the future that we saw earlier, where potentially AI agents and quantum and other technologies will coexist, right? Because right now we've spoken about AI agents and quantum as if they were happening in two different futures. These technologies are going to coexist. So from your perspectives, in a future where these technologies coexist and others may come up as well, how would you define cyber resilience in that future? What would it mean to be resilient in a future with both agentic AI, maybe AGI going even further, and quantum? Grégoire.
So I think that's what I just mentioned. It's being able to adapt to change, and to the fact that you're secure one day, and then there's a new development, and you need to quickly roll out upgraded algorithm, new agents potentially, and so that's really going to be the key. And I think quantum and AI will probably also reinforce each other. We discussed the fact that AI may open up new vulnerabilities for cryptography, allow bad people to explore new types of attacks. One of the things that may limit or slow down the adoption of AI is the amount of energy that it takes to train models and implement AI. But it's a very active field of research in quantum to try to use quantum in order to have energy efficient AI model tuning and this kind of thing. So I think these two technologies are going to reinforce each other, and we're going to have to be able to adapt to change all the time.
I completely agree with you, Grégoire. These two technologies are going to converge and reinforce each other. And resilience is really going to be the name of the game moving forward. And what I mean by that is we've always said it, when it comes to breaches or cyber attacks incidents, that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. I say that's changing. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of how fast. And I think with the convergence with these two technologies, we're going to see a pretty more active and dynamic threat landscape. And so I would say three things come to mind: continuity, resilience, and cyber defense will be underpinned by continuous monitoring, continuous evolution in how we are doing cybersecurity, governance and risk management. The other thing that comes to mind is adaptive. So again, on agility, right? Being able to adapt to the changes and the dynamic environment, the new technologies as they're coming out, and really just think creatively on how to use AI agents for cyber defense, because they do have a very big advantage over human capabilities because they don't sleep. So they can do 24-hour monitoring in your SOCs, right? And do a lot of different types of detection and constant scanning and monitoring of your system. And last but not the least, we really have to think about ecosystem resilience, not just organizational resilience. So this goes back to my point about this imperative right now to have coordination across the ecosystem, across a variety of different topics, including resilience, right? No organization can be resilient on its own. We are getting too interconnected. AI agents, as we're talking about it right now, as in being deployed in an organization, but in the future, maybe AI agents also will be crossing borders. As we've always said, like the attackers don't respect borders. Will it be the same thing with AI agents? So we really do need to take that ecosystem approach to resilience.
Thank you. And the last question before I go to, I also changed the device because I have all of the questions from the audience here. The last question before we go to the audience is, this session will be followed by a series of discussions with policymakers, right? So if you could give one recommendation to diplomats and policymakers to address all of the challenges that we have discussed in the context of governance, what would that recommendation be, Patricia? Only one, hey?
I took a big sigh because I was like, I don't know that I can do one. So I'll do one, but I'll call it like a triad of one. Just think about coordinated governance that's not fragmented across how we're sharing information, the PQC transition, because as Gregoire said, the last one took us a decade, right? And some would argue that it was not a complete decade across the whole, stack. So there's urgency in doing the transition for PQC and then building out these frameworks and thinking about how to manage risk in an agentic AI world.
Thank you.
So first of all, I completely agree with what Patricia just said, and I would say one thing that strikes me is that often when we talk about the quantum risk, and I assume it would be the same with AI, is that people sometimes react as to say, oh, it's a technical problem. And I think it's not a technical problem. It's a strategic problem due to the systemic impact of the quantum risk, but probably AI is the same. And so to elevate the understanding that this is a strategic issue, which then calls for coordination, aligned timelines. If most countries agree on a certain timeline, 2030, for example, but one country doesn't upgrade in time with the quantum threat due to the interconnection, this could open a huge loophole. But really understand, the strategic nature of these shifts in technology.
Thank you. It's a very good point. Yes, sometimes the expression, it's a technical problem, feels like a easy kind of a way out of a very complex situation. But even if some of the solutions might be technical in nature, they do require a lot of policy and strategic thinking behind. Otherwise, you're just playing whack-a-mole with whatever patch is happening.
Policy, I was going to say double, triple clicking on that. Absolutely. I think it's very important that we highlight that this is not just a technical issue, it's a policy and governance issue as well.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, so let's try to go through some of the questions that we have here from the audience. One, it was particularly for you, Gregoire. We heard a lot about this harvest now, decrypt later kind of risk. Can you unpack that a little bit for the audience?
Yeah. So cryptography is typically used for two things. One is ensure confidentiality, and the other is authentication, integrity of information. We're here, I know you, so when you talk, I know that the information comes from you. And while it's public, I could whisper in your ear to guarantee confidentiality if I wanted to tell you a secret. And if you want to do the same thing in the cyber world, you need to use cryptography to encrypt, guarantee confidentiality of the information, and sign information so that I know that it comes from you and not from someone else. Now, harvest now, decrypt later. The idea is that let's say you use non-quantum safe cryptography today, to exchange information. Of course, they may not be a big enough quantum computer to decrypt this information, but a bad actor could actually intercept the communication, store it now, and then wait until a quantum computer becomes available to decrypt this information and retrieve it. And so it depends on the type of information. A lot of information will not be valid or valuable in 2-3 years, but there is strategic information that needs to be protected for more than 3, 5, 10 years. And for that kind of information, it's very important that we take into account the so-called harvest now, decrypt later, and roll out quantum safe solutions early enough to be able to deliver the security guarantee. Maybe just as a quick last point, the integrity question is a bit easier because you could re-sign, it's not vulnerable to retroactive attacks, signatures. You could re-sign the day before a quantum computer becomes available, a document that was signed in the past with a vulnerable solution, and maintain the chain of trust in the future. So there's a bit more time on the authentication signature than on the confidentiality front.
Thank you. And that's a very good point, because some people say, okay, well, if you harvest now but decrypt in 5 years or whenever, what will be the value of the data? Well, it depends on what information is harvested now, and some national security or some strategic data is meant to be classified for 25 years. So what would be the impact of that data being released or leaked 5 years or 10 years earlier than it's supposed to? That's a question for states to think about. Now, coming to you, Patricia, we have a very interesting question around what would be the main challenges for accountability or attribution, depending on the angle that you want to take, of agentic AI conduct. So,
I mean, the challenges, and these are questions that are still being asked right now, even by the topmost minds, and I touched on it, is if an AI agent does something wrong, for example, in an enterprise, right, who's to blame? So questions that we're asking right now and trying to figure out through identity management. And so I think there's going to be, it's an evolving conversation. I don't have the full answer, but those are the challenges that we're going to see around who is responsible for an AI agent doing something that we didn't want it to do, right? How are we going to manage that? I was at a conversation recently where someone compared deploying 500 AI agents in your environment similar to bringing on 500 interns, for example. And we know that interns need coaching, they need steering, they're still very early on in their career. And so how do you govern these AI agents in a way that you're realizing that, this is still software, right? But they have this autonomous capability. And so there's going to be a lot of challenges around access controls, right? The data governance, the identity management. So really ensuring that things are done right to ensure that the agents are working within certain boundaries and constraints. So that in itself, as just even one body of challenge, I think is going to test us moving into the agentic AI era.
thank you. And to wrap up this very interesting panel, we could go on for a very long time, but I have one last question, and I would like to take both of your perspectives on it. And it's about this challenge of trying to balance kind of technology neutral approaches, not in the way that you described, which was more about the use that can be good or bad, but more in how states are characterizing governance instruments as being technologically neutral, meaning they're not designed for one specific technology, but they're meant to be applicable across. So how do we balance this kind of need to remain technologically neutral so that we're not constantly running after whichever new tech is coming with the specific challenges that these technologies are bringing? Like, is the technology neutral approach really sustainable as these disruptive technologies are coming into play? You're going to have
that's a good question. I think in the case of cryptography, I would say there are two steps. There's this current step where we need to implement this transition because there's this big shift that's happening. And so in that sense, it's difficult to be technology neutral because there's one particular problem. There's specific solutions. And so I would say we need to confront this problem and can be technology neutral. Now, on a longer time scale, I think the technology neutral approach for in the context of cybersecurity and cryptography is the need for agility. To focus more on agility than actual solutions, so that we can again, adapt to the threats as they evolve. Because I'm sure that quantum and AI is not the end of the threat landscapes.
Yeah. I really like that question. Got me really thinking. It's a hard question, and one that will define how well we respond to technological advancements. How to balance out technology neutrality. I think you touched on it, Gregoire, the agility part. I will also say the governing principles about how we're approaching it. I mean, that's the very idea behind having principles, is that as things change, you have certain guiding principles around how to approach the issue, whether it's putting human life first as a principle. I'm just throwing out something there as an example, or ensuring that these technologies are built for improving the human condition. But having, and I think this is where multi-stakeholder communities and policymakers have the levers to develop these types of principles that can, bring different states together and agree on these principles. And I think that might be a kind of guiding light for some of the technology neutral approaches, realizing that you will need to tailor make certain things for the technologies, because there are issues that are, relevant to the quantum side that are not relevant to the AI agentic side. And as I said in my prior comments, the only constant that we know we're going to have is change. So ensuring, principles that allow for adaptability and agility in a dynamic environment will be very important. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Gregoire, for helping us set the scene for what the future may hold. It's been a great discussion. We could have gone at so many more questions, but I'm afraid we're running out of time. So please join me in thanking our speakers with a round of applause. Thank you very much. We will now have a short coffee break, and we will be resuming in 15 minutes, so 45 minutes past the hour. Thank you. See you soon.
It's really good.
All right, to go? Ready? All right, welcome back. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the short coffee break. We're now starting the last segment of Cyber Stability Conference, which will include three moderated discussions, trying to understand from slightly different perspectives what are some of the governance challenges ahead of us. So one could say that everything we've heard so far was kind of in preparation for this panel and the ones that will follow, so no pressure to you. I'm very pleased to be joined on stage for this first moderated discussion by, on my far right, Ms. Catherine Priseman, Political Affairs Officer, United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs. And here on my immediate right, Ms. Julia Rodriguez Acosta, Minister Counselor for the Permanent Mission of El Salvador to the United Nations in New York. Welcome to both of you. The focus of this first moderated discussion is really trying to bring everything that we've discussed so far together and really trying to analyze what would be the role or what is going to be the role of the global mechanism in ensuring kind of long-term stability in cyberspace while addressing the evolving threats also related to the technological developments we've heard. So we have, like before, a series of questions just to get us started, and then we'll go to the Slido. And I remind the audience, both here in the room and those following us online, if you go on slido.com and enter the hashtag CS26, you can submit questions, you can vote for questions that are already submitted, and that will help me a lot trying to prioritize the very long list of excellent questions we have received so far. So Catherine, I'd like to start with you with your first question. And from your perspective and in your views, how can multilateral negotiations under the global mechanism remain relevant and effective over time in face of rapidly advancing technologies?
Thank you very much, Giacomo, and thank you very much to UNIDIR and Switzerland for hosting this great week, Geneva Cyber Week, and of course the flagship Cyber Stability Conference. It's always a real pleasure, and I personally am very happy to be back in Geneva. It's been a very long time. I've sort of been chained to New York for all of the open-ended working group meetings, with pleasure, of course. But so it's nice to be here in Geneva, and having these very interesting discussions. So thank you very much for the question. I think before I answer the question, I wanted to say something about the importance of the question, because we've heard a lot, even over the last day, about the global mechanism, of course, but this idea of rapidly advancing technology and keeping the framework fit for purpose in view of technological change. But then we've also heard, and Giacomo, I think you mentioned this in one of your comments too, is that the framework also has to be technology neutral in one way, because we need to make sure that it's applicable over time and that states can adapt it to depending on their national circumstance. So it's sort of this balance between technological neutrality, but also technological awareness. And I don't have the answer exactly how to do that, but I would love to hear from others about how you strike that balance. So that's sort of how I would start. But I think to answer the question more explicitly about how the global mechanism and thereby the multilateral negotiations will remain relevant, well, first and foremost, the global mechanism is permanent. And I think the character of that provides for an iterative, consistent consideration of emerging challenges to the ICT security landscape, which is part and parcel of the technological advancement. So I think the fact that we have this permanent mechanism that will allow for regular consideration of a range of issues, including one of its core pillars is looking at existing and potential threats, which forms a critical part of the global mechanism mandate. And the regular cadence of meetings and allowing for consideration of those threats. And we've already seen states think about how the threat landscape can inform the other aspects of the global mechanism's mandate, from norms, rules, and principles to confidence building, et cetera. And particularly intersections with emerging technologies. The very last final report of the Open-Ended Working Group had the most, I would say, detailed common understandings to date on the intersection of ICTs with AI, quantum. So there's that awareness.
Thank you, Catherine. We'll follow up with a couple of extra questions on this point specifically. But before I do that, Julia, I'd like to come to you with a first question that really focuses on what do you think could be some concrete functions that the global mechanism should prioritize, particularly in its early years, to enhance international cyber stability?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much, Giacomo, for the questions. And also thank you so much for UNIDIR for convening us. It is a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for this to the Swiss government for hosting as well. And it's my real pleasure to be here, part of the chair, the chair for the first biennium of the global mechanism. I think that it is really important, and I think this was really emphasized yesterday, how this global mechanism is building on a strong foundation. We heard for people that they were actually within the GGs and also that helped to shape the outcomes of the OEWGs. And we can see how this cumulative framework that everybody knows and we refer to, that it, it has the CVMs, capacity building, also the norms and international law, has really established something that we can work on. And I think it is really important to have that basis. There is broad recognition that, significant progress has been happening in norms, but also in terms of implementation. We heard, of some of the colleagues that integrated that GGE that in 2015 produced the norms, and then how we can have been working at the UN kind of like further it down and make it more clear. However, I think that one of the messages that we have heard yesterday with the UN member states stating really clearly is that how we move from all this dialogue, everything that has been built out throughout the years towards implementation. So on that context, and answering to your specific questions, the dedicated thematic groups are, a representation of that. They're supposed to be a space where we can have these more interactive discussions, kind of like introduce this high political guidance into practical outcomes, where we are supposed to be, seeing like in integrated manner the framework, so then we can provide substantive recommendations to the plenary. And when, of course, we're going to continue to have the plenary, which is a high political level forum where discussions are elevated, they're considered, and they are agreed by consensus, and then translated into broader guidance for member states. So kind of like what it's new is this like virtuous cycle where we're going to be taking what is happening in the DTGs and then feeding into the plenary. I think this will, as I said, produce more expert level discussions, with people that are in or cybersecurity agencies or incident response team, kind of like informing the discussions that are happening on a diplomatic level. So in practical terms, I think that one of the main outcomes is that this structure that was, crafted through years of negotiation and ended up in the, final report of the last OEWG works as intended. That is, I think, that the priority of the chair of El Salvador, that the DTGs are organized in a cross-cutting and substantive manner, that, you know, the outposts are clear and they feed correctly into the plenary. I think that if, you know, we succeed doing this, this will take important steps in, you know, the permanent mechanism that you referred this morning, because this is something that it's supposed to be continuing over time. And then it will be a very substantive way to make all this dialogue operational.
Thank you for this initial remarks. Also, a lot to unpack there. Catherine, coming back to you, and I actually want to go back to something that was discussed yesterday during the past session, where one of the speakers referenced to, you know, or characterized the previous processes as being both slow and siloed. And on the siloed part of that equation, for many years, the kind of first committee cyber processes were the only processes in the UN where we could have these discussions around cyber and digital, etc. Now there are so many of these processes that are happening within kind of the broader UN ecosystem. So how can in your views, the global mechanism strengthen coherence across all of these different UN processes and bodies that are working on cybersecurity, digital governance, digital cooperation, emerging tech from different angles and perspectives?
Thank you. Yes, I did. I really enjoyed the panel of sort of like we were saying in getting the band back together, you know, all the key players from the previous processes. It was really a pleasure to hear their reflections from, you know, the GGEs to the predecessor, OEWG. And I think, you know, siloing in the UN system is a perennial problem. I think it's something that no matter what issue you work on, whether it's ICT security or small arms and light weapons or climate change or any of these other issues, we will always be faced a bit with siloing. And I think some of it is to be expected. Some of it is just in a very large system, such as the UN organization. For facilitating work, we sort of have to bookmark where our mandates lie. So even in, for example, this global mechanism, I mean, there is a specific mandate, right? And we have to be faithful to that mandate. At the same time, I think you're absolutely right that we now have to be aware of all these other digital related discussions because there's a growing number of them, and rightfully so. We have UN Cybercrime Convention that didn't exist a few years ago. We have a Global Digital Compact that was recently mentioned. And as part of that, we have AI governance discussions, a scientific panel, an AI dialogue. We have the work of the ITU just across the street. I mean, so we do need to be aware. I think both a normative understanding of sort of breaking down the silos and then a practical exchange of information. I think these are really the two ways that we can strengthen coherence. So in terms of the normative understanding, I mean, we see that these issues are not unaffected by each other. We have cyber-enabled crime, where there's an increasing blurring between, well, what is a criminal act? What is, you know, what is an incident that rises to the level of a threat to peace and security? You know, what is that threshold? What is that line? We have the importance of closing digital divides to support not only implementation of and achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, but even just implementing the normative framework, right? Closing digital divides. As I think it was Ambassador Patriota said yesterday, that capacity building to close those digital divides is not an act of solidarity, it's a necessity, right? I really liked that. And we also have, you know, of course, we've talked about the last day and a half, all the tremendous impact, and just in the previous panel, which was excellent, about AI and quantum, AI increasing the scale and speed of ICT threats, but also supporting security solutions, right? The positive side. So we can't deny that these issues are not unaffected. So I think understanding sort of normatively that, yes, we may be bureaucratically operating in silos, but these issues are not unrelated. And then very practically, I think for the global mechanism, we can explore practical exchanges of information. And I think as Julie talked about the DTGs, I think that's a place where we can really benefit from experts and other colleagues working in these different work streams and exchanging information. And particularly in the area of capacity building, I think there's a lot of opportunity to learn from each other, right? So building capacity to close digital divides doesn't just help closing digital divides, it also helps with building resilience, right? And it can also help with understanding application of international law. I mean, I think the payoffs of capacity building can be quite multifaceted, and that in and of itself helps us break silos.
Thank you. No, it was interesting what you mentioned also about the cybercrime convention, because we could see how while that convention was being negotiated, some delegations that were the same teams were on both the cybercrime convention and the OAWG that was happening at the time. And of course, they brought a lot of kind of a cross-pollination of knowledge, if you want, between the two processes. And I think in general, there is probably, as you said, more that can be done to make sure that while respecting the mandates, the missions, the whatever focus that different processes have, there is definitely a lot to gain just by creating opportunities for these communities to exchange knowledge and exchange notes and learn about the work that is being done. Thank you for that. So, Julia, I'd like to come back to you with another question, which kind of builds a little bit on what you were saying earlier around the potential role that the DTGs could play here. But if you had to think of concrete tools or measures or processes or instruments, you call it whatever you like, what such tools could the new global mechanism develop to support member states in ensuring long-term stability? So going more into the concrete actions.
Yes, Giacomo. I think that, as I expressed before, one of, and I think that the priority for this, first biennium we're starting it builds on 30 years of engagement, but it's also new. I mean, we haven't had a permanent mechanism on the agenda item of development of, ICTs in the context of international security. We have kind of like member states used to work in, these kind of silos. Those groups, they were a mandate to do something, they produce an outcome, and now we kind of need to shift the mindset a little bit. It is really important recognizing that we're not starting from zero. Like, for example, it was mentioned yesterday, I think that Ambassador Patriota also said that we have the 2015 norms, and then one or the other ambassador was saying, what are we still discussing implementation? 10 years have passed. But I think that it's important also to recognize further guidance was elaborated in 2021, and then the last report of the OAWG that also provided checklist of implementation. And I think that these are progressive steps that have been taken towards how it stays implement the framework as well. The task for us, for El Salvador, and I think that for member states as well, is to ensure that the tools that we already developed are utilized within the framework of the global mechanism. And what really good example for us is the intergovernmental points of contact directory. This is a highly practical confidence building measure. We believe that it has not yet reached its full potential. We believe it could be a tool that can be further strengthened and utilized. And I think that one of the key priorities for us is kind of like continue to advocate for its universalization. And then how we can use it in the context of ICT-related incidents. So it actually does what it's supposed to do, which is like bridge these, channels of communication between the technical and the diplomatic counterparts. And then if used effectively, of course, it can help to reduce misperception, manage incidents, and also go a step forward and implement the norms, like, for example, like due diligence and those related to attribution. So as Catherine was saying, the global mechanism should remain adaptable. During the negotiation of the modalities for all of us that were there was extensive discussion on the structure, how the TGs will work, and like, for example, possible groups like international law. That was like a very key priority for a lot of developing countries. And I think that, flexibility is essential to, it has been mentioned throughout the conference due to the evolving nature of cyberspace. So I think that, getting back to your point of, long-term stability, the most important thing is that the platform delivers. That member states go to it, that they continue to trust in it, that it strengthened cooperation and international assistance. Because, stability from cyberspace will not only come from concepts, but also for the consistent application of we already agreed. And I think that is also an important element.
Thank you. For the last 5 or 6 minutes, I would like now to go to the questions we have received from the audience. I'm going to present them in a cluster, and then I'm going to ask both of you to give your perspectives on these. So the 3 questions that I can group together. So the first one is, both DTGs are very wide in scope. What should states do to actually achieve tangible agreements in this format? The second question, part of this cluster, reads, how can or could the GMAC innovate to channel multiple views that are difficult to reconcile? And then the last question that is part of this cluster, that kind of touches upon a specific topic, Julia, that you just mentioned, is historically international law has been a sticking point for various processes. How can the global mechanism make tangible progress on how international law applies to cyberspace? So this is kind of a cluster of questions that are all kind of related to the mechanism. You can pick and choose. You can give an answer to one or more of these. Catherine, you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, these are excellent questions, which also makes them very difficult because, these are complex intergovernmental multilateral discussions. And one of the points, and Julie made reference to this, I think there can be a feeling of sort of frustration that these discussions move at a glacial pace, as was mentioned, 10 years later, we're still talking about norm implementation. But I do think it's important. And while I personally can sometimes feel that frustration, I do think it's important to put into perspective what it means to reach consensus by 193 member states with diverse national priorities, with diverse levels of capacity, with diverse technical infrastructure, with different how they define critical infrastructure is so diverse. I mean, it's really quite an achievement. So 10 years in of still discussing these issues, while it is quite a long time, in another way, it's not. And I think that what we have to remember is that each bit of progress is exactly that. And I think the establishment of the DTGs was the main innovation of the global mechanism. And so that's why states have placed so much priority on how they will be organized and how they will tackle these, albeit, quite broad topics in each group. I think that's why there's such careful consideration, right, of how these groups will function, because it does provide for a different format. There's a lot of value in plenary meetings because we need to hear from states what are their priorities, but the DTGs will allow that more action-oriented, focused discussion. And so we have these 2 topics, right? We have quote challenges in the context of the pillars, and we have capacity building. And it is up to states to consider how they want to conceptualize the challenges and the capacity building. And it's not static. I think each DTG sort of cycle will be an opportunity to tweak, to consider how to tackle these things. There are some proposals from states to focus on very specific challenges, critical infrastructure, ransomware. Then there are states who feel very much committed to the 5 pillars and wanting a balanced consideration of those things. So it's a bit of an art. And I have full confidence in El Salvador to work with states to formulate that so that it does allow for those discussions. I think the beauty of these multilateral discussions is that you provide a framework for states to address the things that they feel are critical. So that's not a very straightforward answer, but it is what I think. What I think is what's possible. And then just before turning it to Julie on the international law, I do agree. I think this has been one of the most challenging issues because we have some fundamental divergence of views with regards to sufficiency of existing law versus the need for new law or new legally binding obligations. And that's a fundamental discussion that needs to be further discussed because there is no consensus. So when we discuss international law, it's sort of a bigger discussion of this sort of approach to ICT security. And we need to keep having that discussion. And one of the things that my High Representative, Azumi Nakamitsu, made this point several times in the context of the previous OEWG is that we cannot shy away from those difficult issues. That it may seem like capacity building has more room for progress, which is not to downplay the importance of capacity building, but we need the same energy in international law, in norms. You know, do we need new norms? Do we need additional guidance? Do we need both? So we cannot shy away from those challenging discussions. It's precisely because they're challenging, we need to sort of double down. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Catherine. Again, also very, pertinent and important questions. I think that picking up on the first point that Catherine was making, consensus takes time. Those agreements takes time. It is important to add value to the dialogue. And as Catherine said, we have to have this discussion among 193 of us who had very different interpretations. And it's difficult, it takes time. It could seem like we're only putting like tiny little blocks, but as Ambassador Ghafouri, the chair of the previous OEWG said, it could seem like it is little, but it's a strong foundation. And this is what we want to build upon. I think that on regard to the question of the wide of the discussion, this is something that was, mentioned by several member states. I think that, without prejudging what member states are going to decide on how this discussion would be structured. One of the very good examples that we had in the OEWG was this kind of like scenario-based discussion. It is really important to kind of like understand context when you're talking about a specific, like what Catherine was mentioned, like ransomware. How do you see this from the perspective of a threat? And then how do you connect this to norms implementation? What international law does apply? How these you can use CVMs within this context. What capacity building do you need to assess this threat? I think this is something that it has been used before. It has been already mentioned by some member states. Of course, we're still awaiting to more kind of like having these discussions while we start like actually the substantive part of design and how the DGTs will function. And I think that in regard of the innovation part of it, the DGTs are kind of like an innovative, part of this discussion that we hope that really produces what member states need, that it's having more practical outcomes, having discussions that, people that are at home defending our ICT systems can really correlate. And this is like, this normative framework can be further down and usually produce something that can be applied at home. And I think that, international law, this is one of the pillars that I have enjoyed the most. I'm not a lawyer, but I have learned a lot through the discussions, within the OEWG framework. And I think it is important to continue to discuss, as Catherine was mentioning. We are kind of like in a duality between the normative framework that we have is enough. Do we need a new normative framework? But I think that it is really important to step out of this, continue the dialogue, and to see everything is evolving. Nothing is static, so it's important to continue to have, this conversation in a very technical and I think non-politicized manner, so we can actually moving forward. This is something that we strive for, and we definitely are hoping to see, in the mechanism down the road, more like in-depth and focused discussion on international law. We believe it is a really important key area that we should continue to discuss.
Thank you. I'm afraid we're out of time. Thank you so much, Catherine and Julie, for taking this fireside chat almost with me with a lot of questions, but thank you so much for sharing with us your insights. And please join me in a round of applause for our speakers. Thank you. We are now going to continue with the second moderated discussion. And for this, I would kindly invite, please, kindly invite the speakers for the second moderated discussion to join me here on stage. Mr. Artur Lukmanov, the Special Representative of the President of the Russian Federation for International Cooperation in the field of international information security, and Director of the Department of International Information Security of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, as well as Air Vice Marshal Amon Chomche, the Secretary General of the National Cybersecurity Agency of Thailand. Please, welcome. Thank you.
Nice to see you. How are you?
Please, have a seat. So this second moderated discussion will focus on strengthening trust and building capacity in the future technological era. We've heard over the course of the last day and a half how these new technological advancements are creating more need for capacities, are creating more needs for states to find new and strengthened ways of building trust and confidence with each other. And one could argue that the confidence building pillar of the framework is probably the one that has achieved most concrete outputs and outcomes over the course of the last OEWG, with the establishment of the Global Directory of Points of Contacts, the agreement on a list of voluntary CBMs to be implemented. So there is definitely, going back to what Julie was saying earlier, a very strong foundation that one can leverage when thinking about where to go next. But I would like to take this the next 40 minutes or so to unpack with both of you a little bit this aspect. And Mr. Lukmanov, I would like to start with you, specifically to help us understand how you believe that confidence building measures could be further developed or implemented, if we are using the ones that already exist, to account for technological developments like agentic AI or quantum technologies.
Dr. Giacomo, thank you for this invitation. I think this discussion that we have today, and it's an honor to join this discussion for me. We couldn't manage it yesterday, but thanks to the host country, to UNIDIR, we arrived early in the morning and listened carefully on the last couple of hours, what was discussed here. And you are right that how we go further with these CBMs that we have. We've been calling for the CBMs to be liberated. I mean, Russia, like-minded countries, other UN member states for long. And I think we've made really great progress this year, that we managed to establish the permanent mechanism, global mechanism, to continue these discussions. I think this was the key word, to continue discussions. I wish we could arrive to some decisions looking forward, but my guess is that we need to focus on already what we have. And what we have is that we managed to arrive to legally binding arrangements. There was this question at the previous session, do we need new norms in the international law? We have already one in August 2024. All UN member states agreed on the UN Convention Against Cybercrime. It's a new norm, it's a new reality. Now we're moving forward, although not within the GM, within the global mechanism, but within the United Nations under its auspices, how to first ratify this treaty, this internationally binding arrangement, and how to ensure that we proceed. I'm sure that the key issue here is the founding principle of the United Nations, international cooperation. The cooperation between the UN member states. We should continue, and we will be working hard to continue that we build confidence between the UN member states. We have no other way around. We just need to continue, regardless of anything, within this treaty that we managed to elaborate, but also within the global mechanism. What you asked, Giacomo, is on CBMs. The key factor here is, of course, human capital. You talked before with previous speakers about how to breach this digital divide. My answer would be that the main imperative here is that we should ensure that we have cross-cutting mutual context between experts that we managed to establish within the POC directory, within the OEWG, under the great navigation of Ambassador Gafour. So now we need to make sure that experts cooperate between each other to avoid political attribution of computer text and to focus on engaging into this reality where experts communicate with each other. So I think human factor is here a key one. We need to help our countries, our member states to move forward and to rely on the human communications. A computer program cannot decide. It's not a subject in international relations. It wouldn't be the one to blame for anything. The one to be accountable for would be a man. You know, when I was flying here, I recollected the saying of the Greek philosopher Protagoras. He said, of all things, the measure is man. So we should not make up for anything but man to be a guiding factor in our relations, especially on the issues related to ICTs.
Thank you, Mr. Lukmanov. And we're gonna come back to this point about information sharing because I think it's important. I have a follow-up question on that. But I would like to go now to Vice Marshal Chong Choi. And at the National Cybersecurity Agency, you're really the first line of defense, you know, in many ways when it comes to kind of ICT threats. So from your perspective, having to deal with all of these emerging cyber threats on a daily basis, what are the most urgent capacity gaps that states are currently facing when it comes to dealing with these emerging technologies?
Okay, thank you very much for letting me be here. I'm glad to be part of this. And also, of course, the threat that we are facing is always almost the same for many years regarding the ransomware, the attack on infrastructure, and also especially for Thailand and the whole region of ASEAN, we are very concerned for the scammer. That's the current one. Okay. But for the emerging threat, and the keyword that we've been discussing here for quite some time for these couple of days and many years before this as well is about the AI and the negative effect of AI that might have for the people and also the critical information infrastructure. And also how we're gonna handle and have the quantum ready communication for the future. For the current threat, it seems like we might have some solution. It's just a matter of make sure that we implement the solution. Okay. But for the emerging threat, it's still quite, the solution is still quite unclear regarding what we're going to do with the issue with harvest now, decrypt later, and how many years we have to prepare to protect our system. Okay, and the condition with AI is that when I have this talk in Thailand, I always say that 1 month of AI is 7 years in the real world, because there's so many advancement and development all the time regarding the AI. Okay. But one thing that we've been discussing here, and I wish to show some optimism toward the solution, is that regarding the quantum resistant communication, we seem to have some solution. Okay. Like for example, for this one I have to read it because it's quite specific. The ITU have provided a recommendation Y.3828 to have some quantum ready in terms of communication. So when we discuss about quantum, it seems like even though it's quite scary from what you have heard, but still there might be some silver lining about the solution that we can find and work together and have some standard in the future. Yeah. Because for that one, the ITU and all the related organization, including the ISO, probably need to enforce the standard. It cannot be just the guidance, because if you don't have the standard, how can we make sure that all the pieces of communication can talk to each other? Okay, so for that one, we need to have some capacity building for the people, and it's not just the technical part, but also all the decision maker as well, because it will require substantial amount of money to make sure that we might need to replace or substitute the technologies, procure a new system to make sure that it complies with the standard. Okay. And also the post-quantum cryptography, it seems to be some standard that we can find a solution. So in terms of quantum, it's just a matter of educate the people to make sure that we choose the same solution, to make sure that we are using the same standard in order to counter the emerging threat. Okay. Otherwise, it would be another version of cyber weapon mass of destruction. The reason I'm saying that because some countries will have the capability to decrypt with their quantum computer and Shor's algorithm, but the other might not have. And that could easily start the next version of cyber war when many countries are not protected. Okay. But for the AI security, ethics and safety concern, okay, for that one is still quite, it keeps changing all the time. Okay. And it involves many factors, including not just the organization, but the people as well. Because right now, one thing that we are doing very well with AI is that we can take advantage of it. But the part that concerns us for NCSA is that what we're going to do when we become the target of agentic AI. How can we be ready? And also not just the part that we are the victim, but also when we develop the AI system, how can we be sure that it's secure? Okay. For the application that we have right now, we can do what we call security testing, penetration testing, review source code. But for the AI, it's still quite unknown on what we're going to test for it, to make sure that we cover all the test cases So for this one, we need to keep up and building up the capability as well for the AI. Okay, those would be the two concerns for the emerging threat that we are seeing right now.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I have a follow-up question, but I'll wait for the Q&A part. Mr. Likunal, I would like to go back to what you said earlier about the centrality of the human, of the ability to maintain a connection and be able to exchange information. And I think this is particularly relevant in the context of emerging technologies, when we have heard over the last 2 days how everything is going to be accelerated, time is going to be more and more compressed. So the presence of effective channels of communication between states is going to be increasingly important. So within this context, what frameworks do you think could be leveraged, used, improved to really encourage timely and trusted communication and information exchange between states in this new technological era? In particular, referencing the global point of contact directory, how can that kind of architecture being used to make cooperation more operational and less of an aspiration in a way?
Yes, Dr. Giacomo, thank you for this. It's a great question. And again, the decision on the establishment of the points of contact directory was a unanimous decision taken within the OEWG. It's not working, as you know. We established a mechanism, but it's not working. I mean, Russia employs it. We send messages to our counterparts, but we receive nothing in return. But we want it to continue. We want to make it work. Mm-hmm. So the key factor, I think, for the global mechanism, the permanent one, and I think it will be a great mission for the chair to navigate on how to make it work. We would like to invite all UN member states to think and to focus on the on efforts that we have experienced. I mean, all of UN member states have experienced, which is the launch of exercises between UN member states on countering computer attacks. We introduced this initiative last year when we signed what I said earlier, the UN Convention Against Cybercrime. In Hanoi, we had these exercises. More than 20 teams participated there under UN auspices, and I think that engaging national research under the auspices of the UN, and namely the global mechanism, will help make this POC directory work. Mm-hmm. So we'll be working on that. We'll be asking for expertise for the offices of the UNIDIR, of the first committee of the General Assembly, to help UN member states engage with each other through their points of contact directory, namely technical and diplomatic contacts. That's my answer.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I completely agree with you that the value of a network is only as high as it has been used. Otherwise, it remains just an exercise. So I agree with that. Vice Marshal Chomche, I have a question for you regarding regional cooperation, right? And international and regional cooperation. And how do you think that this type of cooperation can better support states, particularly maybe developing countries, in addressing new challenges in this new technological era?
I think that's the solution: international cooperation and regional cooperation, because like what we've been discussing here, all these new emerging threats is quite new. So we might not have enough of the expertise and the technologies, and even the understanding across the sector of the societies. So we need to provide some international view and also the knowledge and expertise in order to make the changes. Okay. Like for example, if we look back in the past about the mistake that we have done with internet, is that the word internet security came 10 years later than internet. And we're gonna repeat the same mistake with AI. Okay. So for this case, when we want to building up the capability, we need to have the toolkit to educate not just the politician, diplomat, but also the decision maker. We need to have some kind of strategic policy toolkit so to guide the countries in order to choose the right direction. Because in terms of AI and quantum resistance, if we choose the wrong path, we might not be compatible with each other. Okay. And if we choose the wrong path, it means that we have to redo everything. And then it costs a lot of money. And everyone knows economic situation in the world right now, we cannot reinvest on something that we make some bad decision. Okay. And also, we need to have the support of the citizen. Okay. Because when we ask for the money to make the changes, to be ready for the emerging threat, it probably be something that we need to explain to the people that we actually need it. It's the must for us to communicate, building trust within the system, and also to educate the people in terms why we need to have some governance for AI. Why don't we just let it be free, like the beginning of internet, that we focus on freedom and the right of expression, and then it turned out to be some tools that could be used in the effort effect for us. Okay. Those would be the area that we have to work together. Because last thing we want is to have some conflict of information. Okay. We want to do something, and then in the region and the international, we don't have the same voice. It will be very confusing. So if we can agree on what needs to be done, have some kind of standard and guidance that point into the right direction. And for this one, we really hope that we can leave geopolitical issue out of this, so that the one that we choose will not be changed for the future. Okay. We discussed a lot about crypto agility, but for that one, it might not be feasible for all the nations. If we can choose some kind of standard and make sure that everyone can have the access to it, everyone have ability to adopt the standard. And then we can ensure that we can augment the standard to current infrastructure and cross-sector society. I think that should be the solution and the goal for the international and regional cooperation.
Thank you. Thank you very much to both of you. For the last 5 minutes or so, I would like to go to some of the interesting questions that we received from the audience. I'm just gonna, like I did before, I'm gonna cluster 2 or 3, and then you can pick and choose which perspective you would like to elaborate on. One that I find very interesting, because you both refer to the importance of international cooperation. So one question reads, what are the low-hanging fruits, so those elements that you think are most realistically achievable for international cooperation that transcends the current geopolitical tensions and obstacles that may exist? So what do you think is achievable in the current context? The other question that I find very interesting is, to what extent would it be feasible to proceed towards confidence building measures that focus on transparency, on ICT capabilities between states? And then the last one that I want to include in this cluster is, what are your views on the role of the private sector, and what role should the private sector play in future multilateral discussions? So this is kind of a cluster of questions that I'm offering to you. You can pick and choose the perspective that you prefer, and take the discussion where you'd like. Would you like to?
General, I will take the floor first, and I will start. I'll be short. with the last question on this private sector role. Of course, it's important, no doubt. However, we should all bear in mind that it's only about states, UN member states, to be accountable for security issues. Companies or so-called stakeholders cannot be accountable. When companies or developers, experts try to pose themselves as equal, that's not the right way. The UN doesn't work this way. So we'll be calling within the GM global mechanisms that the primary leading role rests with the states. For the private sector, it's about auxiliary nature, facilitator role, consultative role. Yes, that's helpful. Helpful in terms of managing the implementation of national legislation in the UN member states. On transparency, it's a great question, Dr. Giacomo. Thanks for the audience. I'm not sure that we can talk about complete transparency. We're trying to be. It's a good goal, an idealistic one, but I will refer to the issue that you raised before. It's about confidence. The more confidence that we have, and it will evolve with the development of relations between the UN member states, engaging human-to-human factor, putting aside all these technical issues. It's about people. Finally, it's about people, that they should engage with each other. I mean, by people, I mean, of course, delegations that participate in the works of the global mechanisms. And how we can work on the points of context directory. I said before, I think the great thing would be to engage into launching and managing and having it on a regular basis, these exercises on countering computer attacks, exercises between national certs. We will push in this direction. We'll be calling on other delegations to work on it, rather than engaging in political attribution of computer attacks. Thank you.
Anything you'd like to add, please?
Yeah. Okay, I will mix them all up together. About the international cooperation and private sectors and solution. I think what we need right now is to have some international company that will work with more of the global south country, because the solution or the plan for migration, at least for the quantum resistant, usually will be hard to find within the global south country. Just say it for Thailand, when we propose and raise the awareness of the public that we need to change, we wouldn't have enough capable hands to actually do it. So we need help of the public and private to work together. And also another issue with international cooperation, we hope to have some technology that could be open for all, like some open source project that could easily be accessible. And what standard that we hope to have, it should be open standard that everyone can implement as well. Because if the technology piece could only procure by the obscene amount of the budget, then we might not be able to actually implement it. That would make it prohibitive for many of the countries that want to actually make things happen. Okay, so I think international cooperation is the key, and we have to work not just with the private companies, but hopefully we have some organization that could help us to provide the technology that would be open for all to access and actually use it within the system. Okay, otherwise we wouldn't have the solution for these emerging threats.
Thank you. And with that, we are wrapping up this second moderated discussion right on time. So please join me in a round of applause to thank our speakers. Thank you. And without further ado, I'd like now, if I manage to unlock my screen, here we go. I would like now to invite to join me on stage the speakers for the third and last moderated discussion. Mr. Alessandro De Pedis, the Director General for Cybersecurity, ICT and Technological Innovation for the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ms. Alissa Nunes, Deputy Director, International Cyber and Critical Technology Policy, Global Affairs, Canada. And Professor Mohamed Elal, Professor of Law at Moritz College of Law from the Ohio State University. Please welcome here on stage. Okay, so by now you probably know how this is going to work. We're going to go through a first set of questions before looking at what the audience is submitting to us. Again, if you want to ask questions, you can do that through Slido. Mr. De Pedis, I'd like to start with you on a question. This third moderated discussion is really going to focus on the future and of digital governance and how can we build resilient and inclusive governance frameworks for emerging technologies. So this is, if you want, this session is the one that takes all of the discussions we had so far and puts them in a future context. So the question that I have for you is, what governance lessons can be drawn from the past and current technological developments? This is not the first time we're going through some sort of technological transformation. So what can we learn to address the currently very rapidly evolving threat landscape? Yes.
Okay. So thank you. Good morning. What I'll say the overarching lesson that I can draw is that technology outpaces regulation every time. That said, governance can still be effective. It is based on principles, on adaptability, on cooperation. And I believe that this is true both at the national and the international level. So coming to the more specific lessons, the first one, I think, is the importance of information sharing when countering emerging threats, and specifically cyber threats. This is because no single state, government, company, or institution has full visibility of what is happening. So what we see at the public and private level, timely information sharing, be it indicators of compromise, attack patterns, or vulnerabilities linked to new technologies, can significantly reduce response time and limit damage. Of course, in order to do this, you need to have a modicum of trust within countries to share the information and between public and private partners. Now, in the end, private companies are those who own and develop the technology, so having a robust public-private partnership is very, very useful. The second lesson would be the importance of having agreed norms of behavior. And in this perspective, the UN framework for responsible state behavior in cyberspace provides a very clear guidance. I would say there is growing consensus that even in a domain as complex as cyberspace, states should be guided by agreed rules and principles. And if the lesson we can draw from other complex domains like nuclear or space or maritime is that even non-binding rules, if widely endorsed, can have a stabilizing effect and mitigate risks of misunderstanding and escalation. And this is why I think states should strive to enforce the UN framework. And I believe that the global mechanism could deliver a very strong push in that direction. We also realize that we need to define better how international law is applied to cyberspace. And I say this because there is a wide misconception that new technologies are operating in a sort of legal vacuum. But this is not true. I mean, international law applies to cyberspace. And Italy is among a very small group of countries that actually publish their position on this. We have no doubts on whether international law applies to cyberspace, but we realize that we need more clarity on how this happens, because how do concepts like sovereignty, like attribution, due diligence, right to response, even use of force translate into cyberspace? And again, I think the global mechanism can provide a very, very useful platform for the international community to discuss this. And finally, I mean, you were speaking before of confidence building measures, and we realized that this is a very underrated instrument. But in a sector where the mistrust is high and attribution is difficult, then CBM can increase transparency and communication and thereby reduce the risk of conflict and incidents. When you have in place, like in OEC, for example, when you have in place a network of point of contacts, when you have joint exercises, when you have exchange of best practices, increased predictability and reduces tension. And these measures are easily scalable and applicable in other low-cost measures. So my final conclusion is that governments does not necessarily require a formal treaty, because also incremental and trust-based mechanisms can prove effective in this field.
Thank you. I'll come back. I have a couple of follow-up questions, but I'll come back to those later. Ms. Nunes, I'd like to come to you now. And one of the recommendations that we heard from our technical session earlier this morning was on the need to make sure that governance frameworks remain adaptive, that can adapt to evolving technologies. So the question I have for you is how? How can we make sure that these governance frameworks remain adaptive given technologies, and how quickly, just like Mr. De Perez just mentioned, how quickly these technologies are evolving in a way regulation always seems to be catching up? Yeah, it works.
Excellent. And that's a really fantastic question. And I think it's always a temptation when we're talking about new and emerging technologies to move really quickly on governance. But I would say that Canada's experience suggests that how the journey begins plays a really critical role in actually achieving lasting results. So when we think about governance processes, whether in cyber or in adjacent areas like the global dialogue on AI, one of the key lessons from cyberspace is the value of not being overly prescriptive at the outset. Moving deliberately creates space for states to build shared consensus, test assumption, and understandings. So it's really that early breathing room that makes governance durable over time. While this does take time, it does not negate the fact that all states should and must act responsibly, including in compliance with international law. At the same time, the speed of technological change makes it necessary to avoid overly prescriptive or technologically specific approaches. The UN framework for responsible state behavior in cyberspace is a really good example of this approach. It's cumulative and evolving by design. And we've spent a lot of time at this conference looking back at the more than 20 years of incremental step-by-step work to arrive at where we are today. And there's some frustration at that pace, but that pace is precisely what has allowed consensus to hold as technologies, threats, and capabilities have changed. That foundation and the fact that it focuses on broad behavior rather than specific cyber capabilities gives us adaptability and maintains relevance, even as technologies evolve faster than formal governance frameworks ever can. So from Canada's perspective, this means that the real challenge today isn't how to redesign governance every time a new technology emerges. What has the most impact on day-to-day lives is effective implementation of what we've already agreed with the flexibility to adapt to change. Focusing on practical real-world challenges where states can share lessons learned, best practices, and implementation experience is what allows governance to remain responsive without lengthy, resource-intensive projects to reopen core agreements. The law and norms remain indispensable in guiding behavior and maintaining a certain level of civility. International law provides that stability, and the same goes for norms, which set out expectations for the international community. The depth and adaptability of existing international law, including international humanitarian law, has proven as a robust and living framework to cyberspace, regardless of the tools or techniques involved. Similarly, the cyber norms that we've agreed are resilient because they are cyber technology neutral. They focus on behavior and effects, whether cyber operations are AI-enabled, quantum-enabled, or driven by tools we haven't yet imagined. Current events underscore that discussions in the global mechanism, including on how international law applies in cyberspace, are of real-world and real-time significance. For these to be effective, we need to make the links between the technical, policy, and legal issues. The global mechanism's new dedicated thematic groups give states a way to collectively examine evolving issues, test how norms and legal principles apply, and identify where guidance or capacity building may be needed. That structured peer learning is essential in a rapidly changing environment. At the same time, clarity of mandate and division of labor become increasingly important, particularly in an era of constrained UN resources. Within the cybersecurity framework, Canada has consistently emphasized that agreed norms and international law are technology neutral and apply regardless of whether AI or other new technologies are involved. In parallel, the global dialogue on AI plays a distinct but complementary role, advancing shared understanding of AI risks, human rights implications, and capacity building needs through a multi-stakeholder lens. Keeping those rules clear helps avoid duplication and keeps each process focused and effective. The global mechanisms offers an opportunity to discuss cyber-related impacts of AI, but it is not the right forum to discuss the much broader impact of responsible use of AI as a whole. Capacity building is another critical pillar. It enables states to better assess the threat landscape, implement commitments, develop national positions, and engage meaningfully in negotiations. And as reinforced by discussion in session 5 today, states cannot do this alone. Stakeholders bring essential expertise and perspectives without deciding outcomes, and their input strengthens the quality of governance overall. So for Canada, adaptive governance comes from starting deliberately, avoiding overprescription, and relying on flexible structures. We don't need to reinvent governance frameworks every time technology changes. And as we heard earlier today, we should design them in a way that allows them to grow, adapt, and remain relevant as the landscape evolves. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Elisa. I will come back to you with a couple of follow-up questions later on as well. Professor Lal, I'd like to come to you now. And we heard a lot about existing legal and normative frameworks. So I would like to understand from your perspective, how can we leverage, how can we use what we have already to deal with the challenges posed by emerging cyber threats?
Thank you. Thank you, Giacomo. So I have 3 points to make, partially in response to what other panelists have said and what other colleagues have said. So I have 3 points to make. First, I'd like to assess the OEWG and the record that it has set on international law. Second, to think out loud with colleagues on the role of the global permanent mechanism on international law, and also to consider what are the possible outcomes. So let me be very clear. I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated with the outcome of the OEWG on international law. If the best we could do after 10 years of discussions is paragraphs 39 to 46 of the final report, that's disappointing. And I heard Catherine and others talk about the glacial speed with which international law evolves, but let's put this in context. What's the most important treaty around? The UN Charter? 4 years. What's the second most important treaty? The Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties? A total of 20 years, which also includes almost 15 years in the International Law Commission, but 2 or 3 years of negotiations in the diplomatic conference. What are some of the most important resolutions, normative resolutions in the history of the United Nations? The Friendly Relations Declaration that discusses many of the rules that were supposed to be discussed in the OEWG, 1965 to 1970, 5 years of discussions to produce one of the most authoritative interpretations of the fundamental rules of international law. The definition of aggression, Resolution 3314, again, 7 years. So no, it is insufficient. It is insufficient, and it's not because of a lack of doctrinal understanding, it's a lack of political will. Let us to me, that's the truth. And I say this as a person who attended it, as the Deputy Permanent Representative of Egypt, and as an academic, and as a representative of the African Union. From the Global South, it felt like the whole process was being held hostage due to a lack of political will. And from our perspective, we would love the Global Permanent Mechanism to overcome some of these challenges, because it is frustrating, all right? And so that's the way we see it. We don't think that, as Alessandro mentioned, we're not operating in a normative vacuum. The rules of international law exist. It's a question of having the political will to be able to elaborate specific understandings of how specific rules apply in particular contexts in cyberspace. That's generally first. Also, let's stop calling cyber emerging and new. Cyber, it's neither emerging nor new. It is an established technology that is part and parcel of our lives. It is so deeply integrated in every aspect of our lives and every aspect of state conduct. So that's my first sort of general comment. Second, what's the role of the Global Permanent Mechanism? I think for me, at a very basic level, it should provide space for states to express their positions on opinion juris and their positions on the interpretations of established treaties. Again, we're not operating in a normative vacuum, and maybe in the second round I can identify some of these guiding questions. But we have a wealth of law and doctrine and precedent. The idea of the Global Permanent Mechanism, I think in the DTG, where these issues will be discussed, it should be viewed as a space at the very sort of that's the core. The lowest common denominator is just to offer space for countries to express their opinion juris and to articulate what they feel is the appropriate interpretation of established treaty provisions and how they apply in cyberspace. To me, that is a basic, just a lowest common denominator. So what's the outcome? And again, let's be honest, one of the main reasons that the OEWG could not achieve progress on international law is because of a disagreement on what the outcome could be. All I would say from the Global South is all options should be on the table, and none of these options are mutually exclusive. And we should have an honest conversation as to what options, what outcomes, what forms of codification are most practical, what are most achievable, and they don't necessarily exclude each other. There are ways to approach this matter in a way that is practical, pragmatic, and that also achieves the minimum requirements of all parties included. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much also for being very clear in articulating the vision. I think it really helps also putting everything in context, and I think you did that very well, and it's very useful. I'd like to come back to you, Mr. Nunes, with a follow-up question on, again, how can the multilateral negotiations, what kind of working methods can we think to implement in the multilateral negotiations to support more adaptive and inclusive governance?
Thank you for that. And I think the first thing to say is that working methods actually really matter. If we want governance to be adaptive and inclusive, we can't focus only on outcomes or principles. We also need to pay attention to how we work together. One lesson from cyber negotiations is that while formal plenaries absolutely have their place, they're not always the best format for moving conversations forward. Large, highly structured rooms can sometimes reinforce polarization. If we want to make progress, we need more flexibility to engage on practical, real-world challenges, the kinds of problems that states are actually dealing with day to day. When discussions are grounded in concrete case studies, like how we protect critical infrastructure or how we respond when a hospital is hit by ransomware, we often find that states agree on far more than we might expect. Those conversations help move us away from abstract debates and towards shared problem solving. Inclusivity is another critical dimension, but meaningful inclusion requires more than presence. It requires capacity. Not all states have the same resources, staffing, or technical expertise to engage substantively in negotiations, especially in technical areas. If we want adapted governance, we need to invest in leveling that playing field. That's why Canada, together with partners including Australia, Germany, New Zealand, the UK, and the Netherlands, has consistently supported the Women in Cyber Fellowship. During the OEWG years alone, the program has successfully empowered over 110 women from 55 underrepresented small and developing states. We also support UNIDIR's Gender and Disarmament program, including the Women in AI Fellowship. Initiatives like the Tallinn School of Cyber Diplomacy, the Singapore Cyber Fellowship, and Cyber Law International are also key. Canada has been a long-time supporter of Cyber Law International, which has trained over 600 officials on how international law applies in cyberspace. And this brings us to informality. Forums like the dedicated thematic groups offer flexibility that plenaries simply cannot. Because they're informal, they can bring in technical experts, industry, and civil society without procedural barriers, and they give chairs and co-facilitators more latitude to guide discussions with targeted questions and focused themes. We're seeing similar thinking in the global dialogue on AI, where breakout discussions and thematic co-chairs are designed to encourage interaction and diverse viewpoints. And then, of course, stakeholder input is critical, as they often see risks and vulnerabilities long before they surface in diplomatic settings. The key point is that structural and informal agility aren't in tension, they're complementary. You need both. Formal processes provide legitimacy and continuity, while informality allows governance to stay responsive and fit for purpose. When I attended the organizational session of the Global Mechanism in March, what struck me the most was the extent of our shared ground, especially around implementation. We would all benefit from spending more time on the 80% where we agree than the 20% where we don't. Focusing on areas of convergence builds trust and creates the momentum needed to achieve more substantive results over time. So from Canada's perspective, adaptive and inclusive governance depends on working mechanisms that emphasize practical problem solving, capacity building, multi-stakeholder engagement, and sustained dialogue. If we get the how right, the what becomes much easier. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. De Pellis, I'd like to come back to you with a follow-up question. It's also linked to something we've asked to the technical experts earlier this morning. We heard a lot about this concept of resilience and cyber resilience. So in your perspective, what would a resilient cyber governance framework look like in the context of constantly evolving and emerging technologies?
Thank you. Well, I've been in this job for just 3 months, but I can think of a few elements that can define a resilient governance framework. That means one that can actually absorb shocks, respond, adapt quickly, and promote trust in a way. The first element is, in my opinion, is upskilling. It is the training and empowerment of citizens and workers. And that is because I was going to say emerging technologies, but I don't want to irritate Mohammed. So I would say digital technologies have widened the attack surface, but they also place more and more responsibility on citizens and organizations because they are used by billions of people. And a resilience governance framework recognizes that cybersecurity is no longer confined to experts. It requires a widespread digital literacy, it requires continuous upskilling, it requires the creation of a culture of security awareness. And that is actually a problem, even for organizations like my organization, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because we always were a political ministry, not a technical one. So we have a problem in requiring all these basic skills from people, finding capable people, recruiting them. So that means also addressing the persistent shortage of cybersecurity professionals. And therefore, I mean, a resilient cyber governance framework would mean creating a resilient society through consistent, repeated cyber literacy campaigns. Second element, the one mentioned by Alicia before, is flexibility. The pace of innovation is not compatible with static rules. So governments should provide broad legal framework, but then introduce mechanisms to regularly review and update policies, to create regulatory sandboxes to test innovation safely. This is what, for example, Italy did with the law on the governance of artificial intelligence that was published last year. The provision is precisely on sandboxes. And then, of course, promote constant dialogue with policymakers, industry, and research, because this is also essential. And talking flexibility is also important in order to find the right balance between the need, on the one hand, to counter new risks, and on the other, not to stifle innovation. And that is a bit of a problem, especially for the European Union. They had somehow a tendency to over-regulate in some cases. Third element, of course, is inclusivity. I mean, we heard it before. Digital divide is a matter of serious concern, and especially when dealing with disruptive technologies. And not just, this means within countries, including high-income countries, and of course the level of state within the international community. Because these technologies have global impact, but the risks and benefits are unevenly distributed at the national and international level. And therefore, emerging countries, small and medium enterprises, weak sections of society, marginalized communities, they should all have a say, in a way, in shaping government approach, and they all should be able to use these technologies in a safe way. And that means capacity building within and without. And this is also because everything is connected now, and therefore a weak section in our society means undermining resilience for the whole system. And another item is interoperability. I believe it is a key enabler of resilience. If you have inconsistent standards, regulations, technical frameworks, faulty communications, this will create friction and will weaken collective defense. So a resilient governance framework should promote compatibility across the board at the national and international level, so that even different regulatory systems can actually talk to each other. This is very important for incident response, because if systems and organization can communicate and coordinate easily, that means it's also easier to contain and respond to cyber attacks. So if you look at these four elements together, upskilling, flexibility, inclusivity, interoperability, then this points to a model of governance that is dynamic, not static, that is open, is cooperative and not isolated, and that is also forward-looking, not simply reactive. At least this should be the target. I mean, you cannot eliminate uncertainty, but a resilient governance framework should be able to function effectively in spite of uncertainty.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I'd like to come back to you, Professor Lal, to give you the opportunity to elaborate a little bit on what you hinted before in terms of how the global mechanism can provide a useful platform to continue and perhaps deepen some of these discussions. You made a quick reference to potential guiding questions even. Would you mind elaborate on that?
Yeah, for sure. So again, going back to the idea that let me put it this way. There are two approaches that seem to be advocated by various stakeholders and countries in the OEWG and beyond. The first is sort of a doctrinal codification process, and the second is a case-by-case, scenario-based, sectoral approach. I don't think they are mutually exclusive. And the reason I say that is because you cannot really understand the doctrine in isolation from how it's applied. And you cannot answer specific questions like, how do you protect critical infrastructure without having the doctrinal debate? These are two sides of the same coin, and you cannot exclude either of them. All right? So, for example, does the definition of object under Article 52 of Additional Protocol 1 cover data? So for those who are non-lawyers in the room, Additional Protocol 1 to the 1977 Additional Protocol 1 to the 1949 Geneva Conventions defines object. And it basically says in the commentary that it's a tangible, visible object. But that was in the 70s and 80s. So the question would be, is data an object? That's one question. Another question is, under Article 49 of Additional Protocol 1, what is an attack? Again, the protocol defines it as violence, and violence is understood as combat action. The question would be, do you have to cause physical destruction for a cyber operation to constitute an attack under Additional Protocol 1, or is loss of functionality sufficient to cross that threshold? What is the definition of the word force in Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter? Does it necessarily require kinetic effects, or can you classify financial and economic loss as a form of force, as several European countries have indicated in their national positions? What is the threshold between an influence what's the threshold between persuasion and coercion for the purposes of non-intervention? Is sovereignty a principle or a rule? So these are questions that we have to engage with. The previous panel had the colleague from Microsoft who was sort of discussing agentic AI and holding it responsible. Again, we're not operating in a normative vacuum. Principles of strict liability that exist in the common law for generations and that have been applied in, for example, autonomous machinery, in autonomous medical equipment, autonomous vehicles. These are precedents and concepts that could be extended to other fields. So all I'm saying is this, and this is to me is the bottom line, is that the global permanent mechanism at the very basic level should be a space for countries to articulate their positions, to express their opinion juris and their interpretations of established treaties, and then we see where we go from there. And we should have an honest discussion on what the outcome would be and try to depoliticize the discussion. And depoliticize is not the same as saying it's non-political. Everything is political. I'm not, nobody in this room is naive. There are political stakes with these discussions, but depoliticizing it in the sense of trying to address these questions on their merits and trying to ask, how can we move forward, and trying to, as Alyssa mentioned, find this common space which exists. One last thought on capacity building. I don't think maybe this is the Global South pride. I think capacity building is a two-way street. I think everybody learns from the process. Second, I think that capacity building and working on these difficult questions are not sequential. It's in parallel. We all learn together because these are difficult questions. And I've read every single national position in the process of writing the Common African Position for International Law and Cyber. There are many unanswered questions in the national positions because countries, governments, and different government agencies are still trying to work through some of these questions. So capacity building is a two-way street, but also, capacity building programs like the ones that Alyssa mentioned are fantastic. They're incredibly useful, and I should add that Global Affairs Canada assisted with the development of the Common African Position. But again, on the content, the Common African Position is African. It does not express the positions of any particular, it was not influenced by any particular state, and the proof is in the pudding. You compare that to the EU position, it's very different. So all to say, the global permanent mechanism is an opportunity, and I'm going to look to Her Excellency, the Ambassador of El Salvador. And she has a massive responsibility. We will be there with you. We will be there for you, to work with you. But I think that it's an opportunity that we should learn from the experience of the OEWG to say, we don't want to end with paragraphs 39 to 46 that basically say, we reaffirm the prohibition on the use of force. That is, to me, not only is that unfortunate, but it's also a negative signal to the international community as to our commitment, our collective commitment to the foundational rules of international law.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this. And Ambassador Lopez will come to you in a second. I just wanted to ask you in 30 to 40 seconds each to answer a question that has been at the top of the ranking since yesterday. So I feel compelled to asking this question to all of you, which reads, how do we connect the global mechanism more closely with the rapidly changing technological and technical situation where it only meets twice a year? I mean, you can take this in whichever direction you would like, but how do we reconcile the ambition of what we want the global mechanism to do with the limited time and opportunity that it has to actually operate? Maybe 45 seconds each, starting with you, and we go down the line.
Thank you for that. And I think that is, again, a very important question, and it doesn't surprise me that that's been top of the list for the past few days. I would say that what we have within the global mechanism is this new, novel, informal, dedicated thematic group system, right? And it's the informality of that group that gives it the flexibility to include a broad number of stakeholders. And those stakeholders are the ones who have their finger on the pulse, right? Like it's the private sector for the most part that is responsible for critical infrastructure. It's the private sector that often, is aware of new and emerging threats. It's civil society and all those other players that we need to have a part of those conversations, and that will help the global mechanism by informing the dedicated thematic groups in a way that we can't quite do in a formal plenary. So it's that flexibility and inclusion that will happen in that setting, I think, that will equip us to face all the new emerging challenges.
Thank you. Senator Perez, please.
Well, I would say I agree with what Lisa just said. I mean, it's this is a multi-stakeholder process. The role of private companies and academia as well is paramount. I mean, as I said before, private companies own and develop the technologies. They control the critical infrastructure, so they have an essential role to play here. Academia as well. And I also agree, we're also very keen on the dedicated thematic groups. This is where you can actually delve into specific projects. And then there are mechanisms that can be used by the chair to coordinate and to discuss with all the stakeholders between one meeting and the other. I mean, of course, if you submit once a year, twice a year is not enough, but there are ways to have, once you have created this community, to be in touch all year round.
Thank you.
Super quickly, I really love the cyber toolkit that's available online, and one reason I really like it is because it provides hypothetical scenarios. Because let's be honest, if we invite countries to come in and describe, for example, their experiences with incidents or attacks, or that's going to take the discussion into a hyper-politicized direction. But maybe one thing or one idea is to say, all right, we're going to discuss some of these scenarios, such as those offered on the cyber toolkit. I'm assuming everybody in the room knows what, if you don't, it's on Google, you'll find it. So that's one way where to say, look, here's specific situations, and also here is how established law applies, and here are the gaps that we may want to address collectively. And that sort of, some of these scenarios relate to new forms of cyber operations or the application of sort of new technologies like agentic AI or what have you?
Thank you. I'm afraid we've run at the end of this session. I would like to invite all of you to join me in a round of applause to thank our excellent speakers. Thank you. And I would like now to invite my colleague Andrea Gronchi back on stage to guide us through the final segment of Cyber Stability Conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Giacomo, and of course to our wonderful speakers and panelists over the course of today. So before we move into the closing segment, it is my great honor to introduce and bring up to the stage Her Excellency Griselda Lopez, who is the Ambassador and Permanent Representative of El Salvador to the United Nations in New York. And also particularly importantly for our discussions today is the Chair of the Global Mechanism on Developments in the field of ICTs in the context of international security and advancing responsible state behavior in the use of ICTs.
Hello. Good morning, good afternoon. It's a privilege to address you today at the closing of the Cyber Stability Conference convened by UNIDIR. Thank you so much for the kind invitation. I just landed from New York, literally, and I'm very sad that I couldn't be here for the whole conversation, but I got a hint of what it really meant with the last panel, and I want to congratulate all the participants for sharing their knowledge, but also the expectations for the global mechanism, and also the deliberations of the past, but also the future. I'm pretty sure that these 2 days within the framework of Geneva Cyber Week have been precisely marked by these rich discussions. And this definitely shows that this conference is a platform to advance informed, inclusive, and forward-looking discussions on international cyber stability. And it is clear to me that we meet at a moment of transition. This has been reflected, I understand, one way or another across the different panels that you have been attending over the past days. And this transition is not only in technological landscape, marked by the rapid evolution of AI, quantum computing, and also sophisticated cyber threats, but also in how international community approaches cybersecurity governance. And you have also heard about a complex threat landscape shaped by these deep interdependencies across our digital ecosystem. Risks are being amplified precisely by the intersection of the emerging technologies, and the pace of change is challenging as well our collective ability to respond effectively. And this raises important questions, not only about how we address these threats, but also on how our normative framework and what we have just been hearing, the application of international law must evolve in response. So this conference has also taken us through the past, as I said, the present, and also the future of cyber governance. So we know the past. I've heard some frustration as well in the last panel. So for the nearly 3 decades, the states have engaged under the UN framework to address developments of ICTs in the context of international security. And through the work of successive GGEs and also the open-ended working group, we have achieved progress. Some may view it as significant, others may not, but it's clear that it's meaningful, the work that has been done. And the work has built a foundation that we now have to use. We have heard from experts who contributed to these processes, reflecting precisely on the achievements, the lessons learned, and also the foundations being laid for the future. The question for the present is therefore very clear. What do we do with this framework? How do we ensure implementation of what has already been agreed? And many of you also have raised these questions. The establishment of the global mechanism is significant in this regard because it marks the beginning of a new phase, one where the focus must shift from elaboration to the implementation. And this is not just a personal assessment. It is a message that has been consistently conveyed to me by member states in formal discussions, in bilateral meetings, and throughout also this conference. And the call is definitely that we must shift from dialogue to delivery. And let me be clear, this doesn't diminish the importance of dialogue itself, because dialogue remains essential, particularly, as I said, in a complex geopolitical environment where trust is not always a given. Well, indeed, the act of listening, truly listening to one another, should never be underestimated. But dialogue alone is no longer sufficient. Dialogue must be paired with action, and also, as my dear colleague Mohammed mentioned, by political will. The credibility of our efforts of the global mechanism, but also the United Nations, and of the multilateralism more broadly, will increasingly be measured by our ability to translate agreed principles precisely into practical outcomes. So we therefore face a significant task. There are high expectations from the international cyber community as to whether the global mechanism will deliver, whether it will enable states to act, strengthen international cooperation, and also to contribute to greater predictability and stability in cyberspace. And to meet these expectations, the global mechanism must function not only as a forum for exchange, but also as a platform for action. In this regard, the creation of the DTGs, the dedicated thematic groups, is a direct response to that need. We have heard also through this conference how this new structure will function, what is new, why it matters, and what will be required for it to deliver results. And if implemented effectively, these groups can serve as the operational engine of the mechanism, adding a necessary layer of depth and interactivity to our discussions. And at the same time, we must ensure that existing tools are fully utilized. So we must look not only to what we still need to build, but also to what we have already achieved and how to make it work in practice. So the discussions during this conference have also highlighted very, very clearly the role of capacity building. And this is particularly important for developing countries, which must be fully equipped to prevent, detect, and respond to cyber incidents, and also to engage meaningfully in international processes and to contribute to collective security. So capacity building is a key pillar to cyber stability. And as was said during these days, capacity building is not solidarity and is not optional. It is an imperative. So let me also turn to another critical point. Implementation cannot be achieved by member states alone. It has been emphasized both in the UN processes and also in this conference that the private sector, academia, civil society play a key role because they bring technical expertise, innovation, and also operational experience. And it's therefore essential that the global mechanism remains open to structure and sustain engagement with different stakeholders. And that engagement must be substantive and also genuinely inclusive. We recognize that the agreed modalities have some limitations, but this new mechanism also offers opportunities to enhance transparency and also to strengthen stakeholder participation in meaningful ways. So we must make full use of those opportunities. And at the same time, I will be very clear, the global mechanism will remain a state-led process. My responsibility, entrusted to me by member states, is to ensure that this engagement will be balanced, will be meaningful, and also align with the objectives of the mechanism. And this is not a small task, because in an interconnected digital environment, as I said, no state can address these challenges alone. Instability in one domain quickly becomes instability for all. So, distinguished colleagues, we are at an inflection point. So we have an agreed framework, a new mandate that calls for action, and also a platform that is now beginning its work. So the question is whether we will use these elements effectively. So the success of the global mechanism is a collective responsibility. It's not a task for the chair alone. So it will be determined by the choices we make, our willingness to engage constructively, to move beyond well-known positions, and also to work together towards practical outcomes. So this is fundamentally a moment of change, and the global mechanism provides us with the opportunity to make that change. But opportunity also must be matched with commitment and with flexibility and with a shared sense of purpose. So if we can bring these elements together, we will not only strengthen the global mechanism, but we will have contributed to a more stable, secure, and also resilient cyberspace. Thank you very much for the opportunity of meeting you all today, and let's continue working together. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Lopez, for your remarks. I think that was the perfect way to conclude our two-day Cyber Stability Conference. And while I don't want to hold you all any longer than needs be, I will sort of do a little bit of a sum up of the last couple of days and try not to duplicate too many of the elements that Ambassador Lopez has already brought out through her remarks. But I think it's worth taking a quick final couple of minutes to reflect on the journey that we've had over the past 2 days, one that has spanned multiple decades as we've looked at the past through to the present and of course into the future and what stands ahead. And so we started this conference by looking backwards, and our discussions reminded us that cybersecurity has always been at its core a people problem dressed as a technical problem. But the fundamentals of trust, of institutions and of basic cyber hygiene remain as essential today as they were then and decades ago. And as we've heard, even after 2.5 decades of multilateral engagement, we still find ourselves returning to some of these basics. We also revisited the early years of cyber diplomacy. I think the words slow and siloed were the words that were used there. Digital divides were stark, technical voices were scarce, and processes were fragmented across institutions. But we've also seen from those lessons of the past that persistence, broader participation, and key capacity building initiatives have helped to reshape the landscape that we now see. They didn't just bring more countries to the table, they also increased gender equality in those discussions and in those rooms, and they helped ensure that these countries were equipped to contribute meaningfully to those discussions. And we were also reminded that capacity building is essential to close digital divides. And as has been recalled a number of times in slightly different forms of language, capacity building is not an act of charity, but it is a necessity for cyber stability and global stability. The evolution of this field has been driven as much by who participates as much as what has been discussed. From there, we turn to the present. We heard that while the nature of cyber threats have not fundamentally changed over the past decade, their speed, reach, and of course their impact has grown dramatically. And attackers may have gained tempo, but defenders now have the possibility of also gaining leverage if we invest in the right tools, the right skills, and of course the right partnerships. Across sessions, there was one message that came across quite clearly, and that was reiterated in the keynote address by Ambassador Lopez as well, is that implementation really needs to be the focus going forward. We have frameworks, we have consensus reports, we have shared principles. What we lack is the operational follow-through and the sustainable capacity building and cooperation that can bridge those geopolitical divides. We were also reminded that meaningful participation is not just about being present, but of course about being empowered with expertise, with resources, and a voice that can help shape the future of discussions, and of course the outcomes of those discussions. Accessibility and the ability of developing countries, but also the multi-stakeholder community to influence discussion is not a peripheral issue. And today, in our two sessions that we had earlier this morning, we looked ahead, and our final sessions brought the future into pretty sharp focus, a future that will be shaped by AI agents, by quantum, and the next chapter of the global mechanism. And as we've heard this morning, both agentic AI as well as quantum will accelerate change, they will expand capability, and they will also reshape the risks that we're facing. But in both cases, the core challenge is not purely technical. It is strategic, it is political, and it's fundamentally about governance. When it comes to emerging technologies, it was, as was mentioned earlier this morning, it's not about whether these shifts will arrive, but how fast they will arrive. And that speed demands agility in policy, in frameworks, and in how we share information and coordinate responses. Across all of this, there was one theme that was particularly emphasized, and that was this is not the moment for silos or fragmentation. While of course we have to accept that there will always be some degree of siloing and defined mandates, and that is inevitable, we can of course bridge some of these boundaries through practical channels of communication and effective information sharing to connect related digital discussions and keep the broader ecosystem coherent. Coordinated governance, as opposed to parallel or disconnected efforts, will be essential for managing emerging technologies and the risks of those emerging technologies and being able to harness the opportunities that they bring for the global community. And this brings us to the future of the global mechanism. We heard that it must evolve, and not by reinventing the wheel, but building on the lessons, the successes, and even the failures of the past 2.5 decades. Its permanence is one of its key strengths. It gives us a standing platform for iterative, regular, and sustained consideration of the full spectrum of cyber-related issues. It allows us to move towards continuous cooperation and cooperation that is inclusive, implementation focused, and grounded in the realities of how technology is shaping our societies. If there's another sort of overarching message, it's that the only constant is change, and I think we heard that reinforced quite a bit this morning. And of course, that means that we need to be agile and we need to remain agile. And if I can try and leave today's conference with a tone of optimism in the face of the challenges that we face ahead, even if we do accept that technology will continue to outpace the governance, instability is not inevitable. With adaptable frameworks and mechanisms, with international cooperation and confidence building, with effective information sharing, and of course, sustainable capacity building, I like to think that there is hope that we can shape effective governance of cyberspace that is both durable and evolving. So on behalf of UNIDIR, I would like to thank, of course, all of our speakers and panelists, but of course, our great audience that has been with us over the course of the Cyber Stability Conference this year. I would also like to extend a very big thank you to the sponsors of and the donors of UNIDIR's Security and Technology Program, without whom this event would not have been possible. A big thank you to all of the people that made these past 2 days possible. It was very much a team effort. So a big thank you to everyone involved. And of course, a massive thank you to UNIDIR's Security and Technology Program. And of course, the comms team for all of their promotional efforts, for the months of hard work that has gotten us to where we are here. So with that, I would like to conclude the Cyber Stability Conference, and I would also like you to join me in a big round of applause to everyone that made this conference possible, and perhaps to invite the UNIDIR team to come on stage so that we can have a quick photo.